My name is Abigail Smith. At 32, I had authored encryption protocols that secured defense contractors across the southeastern United States. My older brother called me the basement IT girl. He said it at his own rehearsal dinner in front of 80 guests standing right next to his fiancé's father. My parents backed him up. My mother offered her practiced country club smile, the one she saved for charity galas and board members. And the man Julian was trying so desperately to impress looked at me, went still, and said 7 words that cracked the evening wide open. What happened after that, what it cost Julian, what it cost my parents, what it finally gave me permission to stop hiding, none of them saw coming. I barely did either. But I am getting ahead of myself. Welcome back to Revenge Order. Quiet stories about ordinary women, impossible families, and the moment the truth finally stands up on its own. How old are you right now? Drop your age in the comments and be sure to subscribe. Let me take you back to where this storm actually started. 3 weeks before the wedding, on a Thursday night in Huntsville, I was sitting at my kitchen island drinking black tea when my laptop chimed. An email from my mother. She had hit reply all by mistake. The subject line read, "Managing Abigail." I opened it. The thread was between my mother and Julian. They were coordinating my existence for the upcoming wedding week. Julian had typed out a specific request. Keep her away from Marcus. If she starts talking about computers, she is going to bore him to death. Below that, my mother had replied, "Do not worry, I am sending her a link to a dress. It will help her blend in." I clicked the hyperlink she had embedded. It led to a department store page showing a shapeless beige shift dress, the kind of garment designed specifically to make the wearer disappear. They did not view me as a sister attending a family milestone. They viewed me as a liability to a corporate merger. Julian ran a flashy marketing agency called Apex Influence. He leased a penthouse office, he drove a European sports car he could not afford, and he was burning through cash at a rate that terrified my parents. Sienna Sterling, his fiancée, was the daughter of Marcus Sterling. Marcus ran a venture capital firm that backed cybersecurity and defense tech across Alabama. Julian needed Marcus to invest in Apex to prevent a bankruptcy. My family was building a fragile house of cards, and they were terrified I would accidentally breathe on it. I looked at the beige dress on my screen. I did not reply to the email. I did not call my mother to demand an apology. I just closed the tab. I felt the cold porcelain of my tea mug against my palms. The next afternoon, I drove to a boutique downtown and purchased a sharp, tailored navy suit. I knew exactly what my brother was trying to build, and I knew exactly whose money he was trying to take. Marcus Sterling was not just a wealthy father-in-law. Sterling Capital had just led a $40 million funding round for Sentinel Protocol. Sentinel Protocol is my company. I am the lead architect and chief technology officer. Marcus knew my initials on the term sheets. He knew my code. He had just never seen my face. I hung the navy suit in my closet and decided to let gravity do the work. I stared at the navy suit hanging on the back of my bedroom door. The wool blend caught the afternoon light filtering through the blinds. It was structured. It had sharp lines. It was the exact opposite of the shapeless garment my mother wanted me to wear. Buying it felt like crossing a boundary I had respected for over a decade. 10 years ago, I was a junior at an engineering program in Auburn. Julian was a senior in the business school. He was failing his capstone project for a management information systems seminar. He needed a functional database architecture to graduate. He did not ask for my help. He waited until I went to the library, left my dorm room unlocked, and copied the source code from my backup drive. He presented my semester-long project as his own. He got an A. I found out when he bragged about the database structure at a family dinner. He used my exact variable names. I confronted him right there over the roast chicken. I demanded he tell the truth. I expected my parents to intervene to enforce some basic standard of honesty. My father set his fork down and looked at the ceiling. My mother reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her grip was tight enough to bruise. "Abigail, you need to stop making everything about you," she had whispered. "Your brother is graduating next week. Why do you always need the spotlight?" That was the exact moment the dynamic crystallized. Julian was the investment. I was the spare parts catalog. If Julian needed something to succeed, he was entitled to take it. If I complained, I was ruining the family peace. I learned that my family required me to shrink so Julian could look tall. They needed me to be a background character in his triumphant narrative. I accepted the assignment. I stopped sharing my grades. I stopped talking about my projects. I packed my ambition into a quiet, soundproof box and went to work. That trauma is exactly why I structured Sentinel Protocol the way I did. When I built the core encryption engine 5 years ago, I knew I had something valuable. I also knew I possessed zero desire to stand on stages and pitch venture capitalists. The idea of being perceived of holding the spotlight made my chest tight. So I found a co-founder named Ryan. Ryan was a former software salesman with a brilliant smile and a natural immunity to stage fright. We divided the empire. Ryan handled the road shows, the networking dinners, and the pitch decks. I remained the invisible ghost in the machine. I wrote the code. I designed the architecture. I secured the patents. When Sterling Capital ran their due diligence on our firm, Marcus Sterling dealt primarily with Ryan. The legal documents, the patent filings, the final term sheets, all required my signature. I signed them as A. Smith, Chief Technology Officer. Marcus knew my initials. He respected my infrastructure. He had just never sat across a table from me. That arrangement suited me perfectly. My goal for Julian's wedding week was simple: show up, eat the catered chicken, smile for the photos, and return to my quiet life. I did not want to blow up my brother's big day. I did not want to expose his hollow marketing agency. But Julian was making that impossible. Apex Influence was bleeding cash. He leased premium office space in a high-rise. He hired a dozen employees to manage social media accounts for local businesses. But his churn rate was terrible. Clients realized they were paying premium retainer fees for generic templates. Julian needed an infusion of capital just to make payroll. He viewed his upcoming marriage to Sienna Sterling as a backdoor into her father's venture fund. My family was secretly building a financial house of cards to keep Apex Influence afloat until the ink dried on the marriage certificate. They were borrowing against everything they owned. I did not know the specific numbers yet. I just knew the smell of desperation. It radiated off my mother's emails and Julian's frantic social posts. They needed Marcus to believe Julian was a self-made visionary. They needed me to look like a dowdy, low-level IT worker so Marcus would not ask me any industry questions. A single technical conversation between Marcus and me could expose the fact that Julian did not even know the difference between a server rack and a search engine optimization tool. I ran my hand over the sleeve of the navy suit. The fabric was cool and firm. I was done shrinking. I was done wearing beige. I would attend the rehearsal dinner. I would attend the wedding. I would not introduce myself to Marcus Sterling, but I would no longer actively hide from him either. I spent the next few days working from my home office. I reviewed data logs and finalized a software patch for a logistics client. My phone buzzed occasionally with updates from the bridal party group text. Sienna sent photos of floral arrangements. Julian sent a schedule for the groomsmen. My mother sent reminders about the rehearsal dinner timing. I ignored most of them. I treated the wedding like a mandatory corporate offsite. Log the hours, fulfill the obligation, and go home. The Thursday before the wedding ceremony required a logistical errand. My mother called me at 8 in the morning. Her voice carried a thin, brittle edge of panic. She claimed she had forgotten a specific garment bag at her house and needed me to pick it up and deliver it to their hotel suite in downtown Huntsville. She and my father were staying at a luxury hotel near the venue. They were attending a catering walkthrough and would not be in the room. "Just leave it on the bed, Abigail. Do not touch anything else. We are very stressed today." I agreed to run the errand. It was easier to comply with minor logistical requests than to argue. I retrieved the garment bag from their house. I drove downtown. I navigated the hotel parking garage and took the elevator to the suite level. The hotel corridor was quiet. The thick carpet absorbed the sound of my footsteps. I held the plastic keycard my mother had left for me at the front desk. I tapped it against the electronic lock. The heavy wooden door clicked open. I stepped inside. The suite was a chaotic mess of wedding preparation. Tissue paper covered the armchairs, shoeboxes stacked near the windows, half-empty coffee cups sat on the glass coffee table. I walked into the bedroom to place the garment bag on the mattress. As I turned to leave, my gaze caught something resting on the desk near the window. It was a manila folder. It lay open next to my mother's expensive perfume bottle and a tangled pearl necklace. I am an engineer. I do not ignore data. When information sits in plain sight, my brain automatically processes it. I stepped closer to the desk. The top sheet of paper inside the folder bore the logo of a regional bank. It was a financial statement. My eyes scanned the bold text at the top of the page. Then they dropped to the numbers in the balance column. The air in the hotel room seemed to turn heavy and stale. I stopped breathing for a few seconds as my mind calculated the severity of the numbers. This was not just a minor debt. This was a catastrophic financial leak. My parents were not just supporting Julian emotionally, they were funding his illusion with money they did not have. And the documents staring back at me proved they were one missed payment away from losing their own foundation. I heard the faint hum of the elevator chime down the hallway. Footsteps approached the suite door. Someone was coming back early. I reached into my pocket for my phone, my thumb hovering over the camera icon. The game had just shifted from toxic family dynamics to financial ruin, and I needed proof before the door opened. My thumb pressed the capture button on my screen. The camera shutter sound was silent. I took 3 photos of the document lying open on the desk. The lens focused on the bold black ink of the regional bank logo. I zoomed in on the account details to ensure the text remained legible in the image. It was a home equity line of credit statement. The principal amount read $300,000. The collateral listed was my parents' primary residence in Madison County. The available balance read $0.00. I stared at the paper. My father had spent 35 years working middle management at an automotive logistics company. My mother had taught high school English before transitioning to administrative work. They had paid off that 4-bedroom house a decade ago. It was their sanctuary, their retirement fund, their only tangible wealth. Now it carried a maximum capacity lien. I scanned the transaction history printed below the balance summary. The funds had not been drawn down slowly for reasonable expenses like roof repairs or medical bills. The money had vanished in 3 distinct outbound wire transfers over the past 6 months. The receiving account for every single transfer belonged to Apex Influence LLC. Julian had drained every dollar of our parents' equity directly into his failing marketing agency. The arithmetic painted a horrifying picture. I knew the commercial real estate rates for the penthouse office Julian rented downtown. I knew the lease terms on the European sports car he parked out front to project an aura of success. He was not generating revenue. He was burning through his parents' survival money to maintain a visual illusion. My family had not just bought into his fake narrative as a tech visionary, they had bankrolled it. They were actively underwriting a fraud. The stakes instantly shifted from an irritating family dynamic to a terrifying financial implosion. Julian was not pitching Marcus Sterling for corporate growth. He was cornering him for a desperate bailout. If Marcus Sterling looked at Julian's books and walked away, my parents would default on the loan. The bank would foreclose on the house. They would lose everything they had spent 4 decades building. And they were orchestrating this entire charade to trick a venture capitalist into saving them from their own reckless choices. The electronic lock on the suite door beeped. A green light flashed. The heavy brass handle turned downward. I slipped my phone into my blazer pocket just as the door swung inward. My mother stepped into the room. She wore a tailored cream coat, her hair styled in a flawless blowout, holding 2 luxury shopping bags from a boutique down the street. She stopped. Her gaze darted from my face to the open manila folder sitting next to her perfume bottle on the desk. The color drained from her cheeks. The pristine, polished exterior she maintained for the world shattered in a fraction of a second. She dropped the shopping bags. They hit the carpet with a dull thud. She lunged across the room, closing the distance between us in 3 frantic strides. She snatched the manila folder off the wood surface, her manicured fingers clutching the thick paper. She shoved it into the top drawer of the desk and slammed the drawer shut. Her chest heaved as she turned to face me. Her eyes were wide bright with a volatile mixture of panic and hostility. "What are you doing in here?" she demanded. Her voice was sharp, devoid of the sweet tone she used in public. "You asked me to drop off the garment bag," I replied. I kept my posture relaxed. I did not cross my arms. I did not take a step back. I let my calm demeanor highlight her erratic behavior. "I left it on the bed. You were snooping. The folder was open on the desk." I kept my tone level. "You leveraged the house, Mom. $300,000 wired to Julian. The account is empty." Elena flinched. Hearing the exact number spoken out loud seemed to strike her physically. She pressed her hand against the brass handle of the drawer, as if guarding the physical paper would erase the reality of the debt. "You do not understand business, Abigail. Startups require initial capital. Julian is on the verge of a major expansion. Once the Sterling deal closes, he will pay us back with interest. It is a bridge loan." "It is a second mortgage on a fixed income," I corrected her. "And Apex is not a startup. It is a marketing firm with a catastrophic churn rate. He is using your retirement to lease luxury cars. Do not speak about your brother that way." Her defense mechanism triggered instantly. "He is building an empire. He has vision, something you could never comprehend sitting behind a computer screen all day. Marcus Sterling sees his potential. Marcus is going to inject $5 million into Apex next week." "Marcus Sterling investigates ledgers," I said. "He conducts forensic audits. When he sees that Julian's primary revenue stream is a home equity loan from his parents, he will walk away. Venture capitalists do not fund vanity projects. They fund profitable math." Elena stared at me. The hostility in her eyes slowly morphed into something far more dangerous. Calculation. She realized she could not bully me into unseeing the bank statement. She needed to pivot. If I understood the severity of the situation, maybe she could use that understanding to bind me to their sinking ship. She took a deep breath. She smoothed the lapels of her cream coat, forcing her heart rate to slow. The frantic mother vanished, replaced by the tactical operator. "Fine," Elena said. Her voice dropped an octave, becoming a conspiratorial whisper. "You saw the numbers. You know what is at stake. If Julian fails, we lose the house. Your father will have to go back to work at 68. Is that what you want, Abigail? Do you want to see us ruined just so you can be right?" I watched her weaponize her own poor decisions. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She was positioning herself as the victim of a situation she had actively created. "I did not take out the loan," I reminded her. "I did not lie to Marcus Sterling." "We are family," she countered. "We protect each other. Julian just needs to pass the due diligence audit tomorrow. Sterling Capital requires a technical evaluation before they release the funds. Julian told Marcus he has a proprietary data architecture. He needs it to look legitimate." I felt a cold sensation travel down my spine. Julian did not have a proprietary data architecture. He used off-the-shelf cloud storage and generic templates. He had nothing proprietary to his name. "What did he do, Mom?" Elena turned away from the desk. She walked over to the designer handbag she had dropped on the floor. She reached inside and retrieved a sleek leather portfolio. She unzipped it and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Julian is a brilliant marketer," she said, keeping her eyes focused on the document. "But Marcus wants technical assurance. He wants to know Apex has a robust back end. So Julian told him he brought on a silent partner, a technical co-founder, to handle the infrastructure." She stepped toward me and extended the paper. "He just needs you to sign this," she said. Her voice carried that weaponized, sugary warmth again. She was asking for a favor, but framing it as a mandate. It is just a character reference, a formality to show Marcus that the family is unified. It proves Julian has a technical expert advising him. I did not take the paper. I read the header from a distance. It was not a character reference. It was an equity transfer and co-founder addendum. It was a legally binding contract. If I signed that page, I would become legally and financially tethered to Apex Influence. I would become a guarantor for a company built on a fraudulent foundation. They were not just asking me to lie to Marcus Sterling. They were trying to attach my pristine financial identity, my credit, my assets, to Julian's sinking ship. My mother reached into her pocket. She pulled out a cheap, chewed-up plastic pen and shoved it toward my hand. The trap was fully set. The plastic barrel of the pen clicked sharply against my mother's diamond rings. The cap bore deep indentations from someone chewing on it. Julian always chewed his pens when he felt cornered. Elena had likely grabbed it off his desk in a blind rush. That cheap blue ink stick represented the entire reality of their situation, a synthetic facade masking a hollow core. She wanted me to use a chewed-up piece of plastic to sign away my financial security. Elena kept her manicured finger tapped near the bottom of the page, right on the signature line. People who want you to make a mistake always point to where the mistake is finalized. They never point to the terms and conditions. I ignored her tapping finger. I read the bold text at the top margin. I read the indemnification clause. I read the liability transfer. As the chief technology officer of a firm valued at $150 million, I spend 20 hours a week reviewing vendor agreements, compliance frameworks, and liability disclosures. My brain is wired to hunt for the trapdoor in any legal architecture. I found Julian's trapdoor resting quietly in paragraph 3. By signing, I would acknowledge a 20% equity stake in Apex Influence. It sounded generous until you reached the fine print. The equity came with joint and several liability for all existing corporate debts. Julian had commercial leases, vendor invoices, and a drained home equity line of credit. He was trying to wrap his toxic debt in a neat package and hand me the anchor. Furthermore, the document designated me as the lead technical advisor. He intended to hand this exact paper to Marcus Sterling. It was designed to prove his marketing agency possessed high-level cybersecurity infrastructure overseen by a seasoned professional. I looked from the fine print to my mother. She offered a tight, strained smile. "Just initial the bottom, Abigail," she said. "We have a lunch reservation with the bridal party in an hour." I let the cheap pen fall from my fingers. It bounced onto the hotel carpet and rolled under the desk. "This is an equity transfer contract," I said. My voice remained flat and quiet. "This transfers corporate liability to my personal estate. It makes me responsible for Julian's defaulted loans." Elena crossed her arms, her cream coat wrinkled at the elbows. "You are being dramatic. It is standard boilerplate language. Julianne had a lawyer drafted to satisfy the venture capital requirements. Sterling Capital just needs to see a structured technical team before they wire the funds." "Sterling Capital needs to see a profitable business," I corrected her. "You are asking me to commit fraud. You want me to trick Marcus Sterling into believing I manage a back-end server that does not exist." "We are asking you to be a team player," she snapped. The sugary tone vanished. The abrasive, underlying reality surfaced. "Your brother is on the verge of securing $5 million. He has worked his entire life for this moment. All you have to do is write your name on a piece of paper. It costs you nothing." "It costs me my pristine legal record," I said. "If Apex Influence goes bankrupt next month, the creditors will pierce the corporate veil. They will hunt down my personal assets because I signed as a guarantor." I placed my hands on the document. I folded the thick paper in half. The crease was sharp and precise. I folded it again. I slid the squared paper into the interior pocket of my tailored navy blazer. Elena reached out as if to snatch it back, but stopped herself. "Give that back to me. Julian needs that filed today. I will have my corporate attorney review the clauses, I said. If he deems it a safe investment, I will sign it. Until then, it stays with me. Panic fractured her face. The polished Alabama socialite disappeared, leaving a terrified woman facing the imminent loss of her home. There is no time for lawyers. Abigail, she raised her voice, her composure shattered. The Sterling audit is happening today. Julian needs that document right now. Stop analyzing everything. Stop being difficult for once in your life and support your family. I turned my back on her. I walked toward the suite door. She called my name, but I did not stop. I gripped the brass handle and pulled the door open. I stepped into the quiet hallway and let the heavy door click shut, severing her frantic demands. The hotel corridor smelled of expensive floral air freshener and freshly vacuumed carpet. I walked toward the elevator bank. My pulse remained steady. I had expected them to try something underhanded, but the sheer audacity of the equity transfer contract revealed a new level of desperation. They were drowning. They were reaching for anyone to pull under the water with them. A soft electronic chime announced an arriving elevator. The brushed steel doors slid apart. Julian stepped out. He wore a designer gray suit, but the tailoring could not hide his current physical state. Sweat beaded along his hairline. His custom-styled hair looked disheveled. He held his smartphone gripped tightly against his ear. He did not notice me standing near the ice machine alcove. He paced down the hallway toward our parents' suite, his voice a harsh, frantic whisper. "What do you mean they initiated a surprise data audit?" Julian hissed into the phone receiver. "Sterling Capital cannot just ping our servers without a 48-hour warning. It violates the mutual non-disclosure agreement." Julian paused to listen to the person on the other end. He dragged his free hand across his face, wiping away the sweat. "I do not care what their protocol is," Julian argued. "Our back end is built on cheap, generic templates. We do not have encrypted nodes. If Marcus Sterling runs a Tier 1 penetration test, his software will flag our entire infrastructure as a security risk. They will know the user metrics are synthetic. The deal will die on the table." Julian stopped pacing. He leaned against the expensive wallpaper outside his suite. Julian had always treated technology like a magic trick. He believed if the user interface looked sleek, the underlying architecture did not matter. He operated his entire life on surface-level aesthetics. He leased the penthouse. He bought the tailored suits. He assumed the digital world functioned on the same principles of visual deception. Feeding dummy data packets to an enterprise-level audit is the digital equivalent of handing monopoly money to a bank teller and expecting a deposit receipt. It works only if the system is designed to look the other way. Venture capital audits are specifically engineered to tear down walls and inspect the foundation. They hunt for vulnerabilities. They stress-test server loads. They verify encryption standards. Julian was instructing a team of low-level social media managers to defend a generic network against military-grade penetration software. He was sending a paper boat into a hurricane. "Just stall them," Julian ordered his employee. "Feed them the dummy data packets. Reroute the initial ping through a proxy server. Make it look like we have a firewall. Do whatever it takes to pass the first layer of the audit. I will get the technical documentation signed and bring it to Marcus tonight. Just buy me 3 hours." He ended the call. He shoved the phone into his pocket and placed his hand on the brass handle of my parents' suite door. He took a deep breath, attempting to compose his features before facing our mother. He walked inside. I stood in the quiet hallway. My mind processed the fragmented sentences I had just overheard. Julian was facing a surprise technical audit from Sterling Capital. He instructed his team to spoof the data and feed dummy metrics to the venture capital firm. He intended to fake a robust cybersecurity defense to secure a $5 million investment. He thought he was hacking a nameless corporate server. He thought he was outsmarting a generic algorithm. He had no idea that Sterling Capital mandated all of their portfolio candidates to pass an audit conducted by their primary cybersecurity partner. He had no idea what system was currently knocking on his digital front door. I reached into my blazer pocket and touched the folded contract. A cold, clear realization washed over me. I knew exactly what software was auditing his company. I left the elevator bank and walked into the main lobby of the hotel. The environment was designed to project quiet affluence. Polished marble floors reflected the warm glow of crystal chandeliers. A grand piano sat in the corner, where a musician played a slow jazz melody. The scent of expensive espresso and fresh lilies drifted through the conditioned air. It was a setting built for people who possessed actual wealth, not those pretending to hold it. I found a secluded wingback chair tucked behind a decorative indoor palm tree. I sat down and rested my leather handbag on the floor. I reached into my pocket and retrieved my smartphone. As an engineer, I do not process trauma through tears or raised voices. I process it through data. When a structure exhibits signs of failure, you do not panic. You isolate the variables. You inspect the load paths. You find the exact point where the stress exceeds the capacity. I unlocked my screen and opened my photo gallery. I selected the image I had captured in my parents' suite just minutes earlier. The stark black ink of the regional bank logo filled the display. I zoomed in on the itemized transaction history printed below the $0 available balance. The home equity line of credit had been drained in 3 distinct stages. I needed to understand the timeline of the collapse. The first outbound wire transfer occurred 8 months ago. The amount was $50,000. I pulled a small notebook from my bag and jotted the date down. I knew what happened 8 months ago. That was the exact week Julian signed a commercial lease for his penthouse office downtown. The landlord would have required first month, last month, and a substantial security deposit for a newly formed limited liability company. The second transfer was the largest, $190,000. It was withdrawn 4 months ago. That money likely covered operating expenses, employee payroll, and the down payment on the European sports car Julian drove to client meetings. It was the capital required to sustain the visual illusion of a thriving marketing agency. The third transfer caught my attention. It was for $60,000. The date of the withdrawal was October 12th. $60,000 is a very specific amount of money. It is not a standard payroll run. It is not a quarterly tax payment. It is a lump sum designed for a singular transaction. I minimized the photo gallery and opened a web browser. I navigated to Julian's public social media profile. Julian treated his online presence like a curated museum exhibit. He documented every milestone, every luxury dinner, every fabricated success to maintain his brand identity. His timeline was a meticulously maintained ledger of his public life. I scrolled down past the recent posts about the upcoming wedding. I scrolled past the photos of his groomsmen trying on tuxedos. I scrolled until I reached the posts from the previous autumn. I stopped scrolling on a photograph dated October 14th. The image showed Julian and Sienna standing on a sunlit terrace overlooking a vineyard in Napa Valley, California. The golden hour light hit them perfectly. Julian wore a crisp white linen shirt unbuttoned at the collar. Sienna wore a flowing summer dress. She was holding her left hand up toward the camera lens. A 3-carat custom-cut diamond rested on her ring finger. The caption beneath the photo read, "She said yes to forever, building an empire with my favorite person." I stared at the timestamp, October 14th. I switched back to my photo gallery and looked at the bank statement, October 12th. It takes roughly 48 hours for a high-value wire transfer to clear between regional and national banking institutions. High-end jewelers do not offer layaway programs for custom 3-carat diamonds. They require cleared liquid funds before the client leaves the showroom. The math aligned with terrifying precision. The $60,000 left my parents' Madison County house on Tuesday. It turned into compressed carbon on Sienna's finger by Thursday afternoon. A chilling realization washed over me. The temperature in the hotel lobby seemed to drop. The soft jazz music faded into white noise. The plot twist was sickening. The home equity line of credit was not just funding a failing business. It was not just covering payroll or paying for a fancy office view. My parents had literally drained their retirement safety net to purchase Sienna's engagement ring. They had financed their own son's vanity to trick a venture capitalist's daughter into marriage. This changed the entire architecture of the deception. It was no longer just a struggling entrepreneur faking success to secure a legitimate investment. It was a predatory corporate merger disguised as a romantic love story. Julian had nothing. The penthouse office, the European sports car, the 3-carat diamond ring. It was all a mirage, constructed on top of my parents' debt. Sienna believed she was marrying a self-made visionary who matched her socioeconomic status. She thought the ring was a symbol of his individual success and devotion. She had no idea she was wearing the financial ruin of 2 middle-class retirees on her left hand. I felt a cold, analytical detachment settle over my mind. The emotion drained out of me, replaced by the clear, sterile logic of a system failure. My parents were not victims in this scenario. They were active accomplices. My father had spent 35 years working logistics. He understood the value of a dollar. He knew exactly what signing a second mortgage entailed. My mother had justified the risk because she viewed the Sterling family fortune as the ultimate return on investment. They bet their house, their security, and their integrity on the assumption that Julian could secure a ring, secure the girl, and secure Marcus Sterling's venture capital fund. They had constructed a reality entirely out of lies. And when that reality began to wobble under the weight of an impending technical audit, they tried to drag me into the blast radius. I reached into my tailored blazer and touched the folded equity transfer contract. They needed my signature to pacify Marcus Sterling. They needed my pristine financial identity to act as the load-bearing pillar for their fraudulent structure. They wanted me to assume the liability for the penthouse, the car, and the diamond ring. I locked my phone screen. The display went dark, reflecting the lobby chandelier in the black glass. I was not going to walk back upstairs. I was not going to knock on their suite door and confront them with the timeline. I was not going to stage an emotional intervention or demand an apology. Warning them would only give them an opportunity to pivot, to find another victim, to draft a new lie. Trying to save people who are actively trying to drown you is a logistical failure. It defies the laws of physics. I stood up from the wingback chair. I picked up my leather handbag. I smoothed the lapels of my navy suit. Julian was currently standing in a hotel hallway, sweating through his designer clothes. He was instructing his team of social media managers to spoof data packets. He was trying to bypass a Tier 1 penetration test initiated by Sterling Capital. He believed he could stall the software long enough to secure the funding. He did not know that Sterling Capital mandated all of their portfolio candidates to pass a cybersecurity audit conducted by Sentinel Protocol. He did not know that the invisible ghost in the machine was currently sitting in the lobby of his hotel. I needed a terminal. I needed a secure internet connection. I needed to monitor the network traffic and watch my brother test the structural integrity of his lies against a system designed to crush them. I turned away from the grand piano and the lobby bar. I walked down a quiet side corridor, following the brass signs pointing toward the executive amenities. I was heading to the Hotel Business Center. The digital war zone was about to open, and I wanted a front row seat. The Hotel Business Center was located at the end of a long, windowless corridor on the second floor. It lacked the polished marble and crystal chandeliers of the main lobby. The space was purely functional, designed for stranded executives needing to print boarding passes or sign last-minute contracts. I pushed open the frosted glass door. The room was empty. The air smelled faintly of ozone and warm printer toner. The only sound was the low, steady hum of the fluorescent lights embedded in the drop ceiling. That persistent, mechanical hum was a serene contrast to the digital war zone I was about to enter. I walked past a row of generic desktop computers and chose a workstation positioned in the far corner facing the door. I pulled a cheap mesh chair away from the desk and sat down. The rough fabric scratched against the fine wool of my tailored blazer. I unzipped my leather handbag and retrieved my personal laptop. It is a custom-built machine, stripped of commercial branding, encased in a matte black magnesium shell. I lifted the lid. The screen woke instantly. I bypassed the unsecured hotel network and tethered the computer to my encrypted cellular hotspot. 5 years ago, when Ryan and I launched Sentinel Protocol, we designed the architecture specifically for the defense contractors operating out of the Cummings Research Park here in Huntsville. Our clients handled classified logistics and aerospace blueprints. They needed cybersecurity infrastructure that did not just build high walls, but actively hunted for internal inconsistencies. We engineered an algorithm that cross-referenced data streams to detect anomalies. If a user metric did not match the corresponding revenue traffic, the system flagged the discrepancy. When Marcus Sterling acquired a stake in our firm, he did not just inject $40 million into our operating budget. He integrated our software into his own venture capital firm. Sterling Capital mandated that every single startup, every tech company, every marketing agency seeking their investment money had to pass a rigorous automated due diligence audit. The audit verified user retention, revenue, encryption standards, and server latency. Marcus did not trust pitch decks. He trusted our code. I opened a secure terminal window. The interface was stark black background with crisp white text. I typed my administrative credentials and initiated the multi-factor authentication handshake, a secure token routed to my phone. I verified the login and bypassed the firewall accessing the core monitoring dashboard of Sentinel Protocol. The dashboard populated across my screen displaying active audits occurring nationwide. I filtered the incoming data streams by geographic location and requesting entity. I narrowed the parameters to Madison County, Alabama, and isolated the audit requested by Sterling Capital. A single progress bar materialized on my screen. Below it, a string of numbers identified the target server. It was the IP address assigned to Apex Influence. My brother was currently upstairs in his luxury suite, sweating through his designer clothes. He had ordered his team of underpaid social media managers to defend a generic, off-the-shelf server against military-grade penetration software. The progress bar on my screen hovered at 0%. The audit was initializing. I rested my wrists on the edge of the desk. The horrific, beautiful irony of the situation settled over me like a heavy winter coat. Julian was desperately trying to fake a robust tech company to impress Marcus Sterling. He was utilizing funds stolen from our parents' retirement account to lease the equipment and pay the staff currently executing this fraud. He wanted to secure a $5 million bailout. And the mechanism evaluating his worth, the gatekeeper standing between him and the venture capital money, was a software architecture I wrote. He was literally trying to lie to my algorithm to impress a man who had just paid $40 million for my brain. The dashboard blinked. A green connection node illuminated, indicating that the Apex Influence server had acknowledged the initial ping from the Sterling Capital audit portal. The digital war zone opened. Data packets began flowing across my screen, representing the information Julian's team was feeding into the portal. The visual interface rendered the incoming traffic as cascading lines of code. I tracked the headers. The first wave of data contained user engagement metrics. Julian claimed Apex Influence possessed a proprietary algorithm that maximized client retention. His employees were currently uploading synthetic user logs to simulate high-volume traffic. The numbers were absurd. The incoming metrics showed a daily active user count that rivaled established national media platforms. They were routing dummy traffic through proxy servers, attempting to mimic organic growth. To a human observer reviewing a printed spreadsheet, the numbers might look impressive. To a machine learning algorithm designed to track the origin IP of every single click, the spoofing was glaringly obvious. The second wave of data hit the portal: financial ledgers. Julian was submitting digitized profit and loss statements. He needed Marcus to believe the agency generated enough revenue to justify the $5 million valuation. I watched the fabricated revenue streams hit the Sentinel server. The numbers did not align with the synthetic user traffic. In a real company, a specific volume of engagement generates a predictable range of conversion revenue. Julian's team was just throwing large, impressive numbers at the digital wall, hoping the system would accept the math. I leaned back in the cheap mesh chair. I took my hands off the keyboard and crossed my arms over my chest. When you design a flawless trap, you do not need to spring it yourself. You do not need to interfere. Any manual intervention would taint the results and leave a digital fingerprint. If I sabotaged his server logs, Julian could claim external interference. He could tell Marcus his systems were hacked by a competitor. He could play the victim, and my parents would champion his defense. I did not need to write a single line of malicious code to destroy him. I just needed to watch him try to outsmart a system specifically engineered to catch men exactly like him. Men who rely on visual aesthetics and hollow confidence to mask their lack of foundational competence. The audit protocol progressed to the first major checkpoint, the initial firewall verification. Sentinel protocol tests the surface-level security of the target server before diving into the deep packet inspection. Julian's employees were trying to construct a digital barricade using generic security templates downloaded from commercial vendors. They were taping cardboard over a bank vault door. The progress bar on my screen inched forward. 10%. 15%. The Sentinel algorithm initiated a simulated stress test, firing a rapid sequence of encrypted requests at the Apex influence server. The goal was to measure the latency threshold. A secure proprietary server processes those requests with a specific mathematical drag. A cheap generic server either crashes under the load or returns the request too quickly, proving it lacks true encryption. I watched the latency numbers fluctuate. Julian's team was using a traffic shaping tool to artificially slow down their server response times, attempting to mimic the drag of high-level encryption. It was a clever trick for a desperate marketing team. It showed they had done at least a marginal amount of research into how due diligence audits function. They knew the speed of the response mattered just as much as the content. The fluorescent lights buzzed above my head. The quiet business center felt miles away from the chaos unfolding in the suite upstairs. My breathing remained slow and measured. The dashboard displayed the incoming spoofed data as a swirling current of blue and white text. Julian was fighting for his life, his penthouse, his sports car, and the 3-carat diamond ring bought with my parents' future. He was throwing everything he had at the digital barricade. I kept my eyes fixed on the progress bar as it reached the 20% mark. The system was evaluating the surface-level firewall and the artificial latency parameters. The initial verdict was processing. The digital scale tipped, and I waited to see if his paper boat would survive the first wave of the hurricane. The progress bar on my dashboard paused at 20%. The algorithm churned through the incoming data packets, analyzing the artificial latency parameters Julian's team had established. For 20 agonizing minutes, the blue and white text on the screen remained static. The only movement was the blinking cursor at the bottom of the terminal window, indicating the system was calculating the probability of fraud. Then the screen updated. A bright green checkmark materialized next to the target server IP address. The text below it read, Level 1 firewall passed. Surface metrics verified. I leaned forward in the mesh chair, my eyes narrowing at the digital readout. The red herring was brilliantly executed. Julian's underpaid social media managers had successfully spoofed the surface-level latency metrics. They had managed to convince the initial automated sweep that the Apex influence server possessed standard commercial encryption. They had disguised their generic templates well enough to pass the basic visual inspection of a venture capital audit. If Marcus Sterling utilized standard off-the-shelf due diligence software, Julian would have actually gotten away with it. The green checkmark would have triggered a release of funds. My brother would have secured a $5 million bailout, built an entire empire on a foundation of stolen retirement money, and continued his arrogant trajectory without facing a single consequence. As the solitary audience member of this digital theater, I felt a momentary spike of tension. The physical reality of the situation pressed against my chest. My parents were facing bankruptcy. Julian held a fraudulent equity transfer contract he was desperate for me to sign. If he managed to pull off this massive deception, he would use that money to validate every terrible decision my family had ever made. He would prove that manipulation and theft were superior to competence and hard work. Would he actually beat the system? Could his fabricated narrative outsmart the underlying mathematics? I took a slow breath, forcing the tension out of my shoulders. The panic was illogical. It was an emotional response to a past trauma, not a rational assessment of the current architecture. I did not build Sentinel Protocol to function like standard off-the-shelf software. I built it for defense contractors who managed national security logistics. I engineered it to operate on the assumption that every initial success is a potential deception. The dramatic irony settled over me, thick and satisfying. Julian did not know the technical specifications of the gatekeeper he was currently fighting. He did not know that Sentinel Protocol utilizes a secondary deep packet inspection protocol. Our software does not execute a full scan upon initial contact. It delays the deep inspection specifically to catch spoofers off guard. It allows the target server to believe it has passed the firewall test, encouraging the administrators to relax their defensive posture and upload their core data without aggressive masking. I watched the progress bar inch past 20%, moving steadily toward the Tier 1 data nodes. The green checkmark remained on the screen, acting as digital bait. Upstairs in the luxury suite, Julian was likely celebrating. He was probably pacing the expensive carpet, running his hand through his custom-styled hair, exhaling a deep breath of relief. He believed he had beaten the machine. He thought he had outsmarted a nameless, faceless corporate server located in a sterile data center thousands of miles away. He had no idea he was actually walking blindfolded into his sister's meticulously designed digital fortress. And he was completely unaware that the machine was currently locking the doors from the inside. The progress bar hit 50%. The secondary protocol engaged. The interface on my screen shifted from the surface-level latency metrics to the deep packet cross-referencing matrix. The system stopped looking at the speed of the data and started tearing apart the actual content. Julian's team, having bypassed the initial firewall, began uploading the core user logs and financial ledgers to satisfy the final requirements of the venture capital audit. The system consumed the data at a terrifying velocity. It ripped open the synthetic user metrics Julian had purchased from a click farm. It analyzed the origin IP addresses of every single simulated interaction. A genuine user interacting with a marketing platform generates a chaotic, unpredictable trail of data. They click erratically. They linger on pages for variable durations. They access the site from different geographic locations. The synthetic data Julian uploaded was too perfect. The clicks occurred at precise mechanical intervals. The IP addresses cycled through known proxy servers utilized by offshore server farms. It was the digital equivalent of a counterfeit painting, where the brushstrokes are too uniform to be human. The Sentinel algorithm compared the origin points of the user traffic to the geographic distribution of the claimed revenue streams. Julian's digitized profit and loss statements indicated massive advertising campaigns executed across the southeastern United States. The deep packet inspection revealed that 90% of his user engagement originated from a single server cluster located in Eastern Europe. The math did not align. The physics of the company were fraudulent. The load paths of his business model were structurally impossible. I reached for the paper cup sitting near the edge of the desk. I had purchased a black coffee from a downstairs cafe an hour ago. I took a sip. The liquid was lukewarm and bitter, but it grounded me in the physical space of the business center. The fluorescent lights overhead continued their steady mechanical hum. I watched the algorithm execute its final sequence with the clinical detachment of an engineer observing a structural stress test. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to argue with my mother about the home equity line of credit. I did not need to beg my father to intervene. The objective reality of the situation was unfolding silently in lines of white text across a black terminal window. The truth does not require an audience to be valid. It only requires a system capable of measuring it accurately. The progress bar crossed 80%. The system gathered the discrepancies, compiling a comprehensive ledger of every fabricated data packet, every spoofed latency metric, and every impossible revenue claim. It was building a digital indictment that no amount of charisma or tailored suits could dismiss. Julian thought he was the architect of his own destiny. He believed he could control the narrative by managing the visuals. He leased the penthouse, he drove the car, he bought the 3-carat diamond ring with my parents' retirement money. He assumed the venture capital world operated on the same superficial logic as his social media accounts. He did not understand that when you ask for $5 million, the people holding the checkbook do not look at the paint job. They inspect the foundation. And his foundation was built on sand. The progress bar reached 95%. The deep packet inspection concluded. The system paused momentarily, preparing to issue the final verdict. The green checkmark indicating the passed firewall still lingered on the screen, a mocking reminder of Julian's temporary victory. The algorithm possessed all the necessary data to render a decision. The trap was fully loaded. The bait was taken, and the steel jaws were ready to snap shut. I set the lukewarm coffee cup down on the desk. I placed my hands on my lap. The digital war zone was about to deliver its first casualty, and I waited for the final line of code to execute. The digital clock in the corner of my terminal window clicked to 2:14 in the afternoon. The progress bar reached 100%. The algorithm had finished digesting the core data packets uploaded by Julian's team. The processing phase ended. The judgment phase began. The green checkmark indicating the passed firewall dissolved. In its place, the screen flashed a brilliant, unforgiving shade of crimson. The stark color illuminated my face in the dim lighting of the hotel business center. A solid block of text rendered across the dashboard. Tier 1 fraud indicator. Fabricated data packets detected. Julian's spoofed revenue streams had collapsed against the cross-referencing logic of Sentinel Protocol. The system had isolated the synthetic user traffic, traced the offshore proxy servers, and compared the geographic timestamps to the financial ledgers. The architecture of his lies could not withstand the mathematical scrutiny. The software did not pause to consider the implications. An algorithm possesses no empathy. It does not care about impending weddings, custom-tailored tuxedos, or 3-carat diamond rings. It simply measures the load-bearing capacity of the data and reports structural failure. A secondary window popped open on my screen. The system was automatically generating a comprehensive failure report. I watched the software compile the evidence. It packaged the initial attempt to spoof the latency metrics. It bundled the digitized profit and loss statements alongside the conflicting offshore IP logs. It attached the time-stamped records of every fraudulent input. The forensic dossier compressed into a secure, encrypted file. A routing protocol engaged. The destination was pre-programmed into the venture capital audit parameters. The report transmitted to the requesting party. It bypassed standard email servers and landed directly in the secure executive inbox of Sterling Capital. Upstairs in the luxury suite, my brother was likely celebrating a premature victory. He probably believed the silent delay meant his generic templates were holding up under pressure. He was pouring a drink, adjusting his tie, preparing to walk into a rehearsal dinner with the unearned confidence of a self-made titan. He had no idea his corporate death warrant was currently traveling through fiber optic cables at the speed of light. My smartphone rested on the laminate desk next to my laptop. The screen was dark. 30 seconds after the Sentinel server transmitted the forensic dossier, the device vibrated. A sharp, singular buzz that rattled the plastic casing against the wood. It was not a standard text message. It was an alert from a proprietary encrypted messaging application utilized exclusively by the executive board at Sentinel Protocol and our primary venture capital partners. I unlocked the screen. The sender was Marcus Sterling. Marcus was a man who built his fortune funding defense technology. He spent his days evaluating military-grade infrastructure and forensic accounting ledgers. He despised liars. He viewed corporate deception not just as a poor business practice, but as a personal insult to his intelligence. Julian handing him a fabricated back end to secure $5 million was the ultimate offense. I opened the encrypted chat thread. Marcus had sent a single message to his anonymous chief technology officer, a Smith. Your software just flagged my future son-in-law's agency for enterprise fraud. Reviewing the logs now. I stared at the glowing white text. The dramatic irony was a tangible, heavy presence in the quiet room. Marcus Sterling was sitting in his own office reading the terminal diagnosis of Julian's empire. He was watching the mirage evaporate in real time. He was looking right at the genius of my software. But he still did not know that A. Smith, the lead architect he trusted with his $40 million investment, was the exact same woman his future son-in-law had labeled a basement it girl. He did not know the developer who built the trap was sitting in a cheap mesh chair 3 floors below the fraudster. I placed my fingers over the digital keyboard on my phone screen. I did not need to offer condolences. I did not need to explain the familial connection or apologize for my brother's actions. I was functioning in my capacity as an executive verifying the accuracy of a deployed product. I typed a 4-word reply. Let the system work. I hit send. The encrypted bubble materialized on the screen and instantly marked as delivered. I locked my phone and slid it into my blazer pocket. I reached forward and closed my laptop. The magnesium shell snapped shut with a satisfying mechanical click. The terminal window vanished, cutting off the red glare of the fraud indicator. The screen went black. The audit was over. The digital war zone returned to silence. The financial ruin of Apex Influence was sealed in the servers, verified by mathematics, and delivered to the one man holding the checkbook. There was no remaining legal maneuver Julian could execute to undo the damage. He could not charm his way out of a forensic data audit. He could not smile his way past a Tier 1 security failure. All that remained was the physical collision of these truths. The digital reality was scheduled to crash into the fabricated social reality in exactly 3 hours. The impact site would be a mahogany-paneled private dining room at a waterfront country club surrounded by white orchids and expensive champagne. I stood up from the workstation. I gathered my belongings, sliding the heavy laptop into my leather handbag. I pushed the mesh chair back under the desk, ensuring the business center looked exactly as untouched as when I had entered. I walked out into the windowless corridor, letting the frosted glass door swing shut behind me. I left the hotel and navigated the parking garage to retrieve my car. The afternoon sun hung low in the Alabama sky, casting long shadows across the concrete pillars. I drove back to my house on the outskirts of Huntsville. The drive provided a necessary transition space. I needed to shift my mindset from the sterile logic of code to the chaotic, unpredictable environment of a family gathering. I walked through my front door and headed straight for the bedroom. The shapeless beige shift dress my mother had mandated I wear hung on a hook near the mirror. She had sent it via expedited shipping to ensure I had no excuse to wear anything else. It was a garment woven out of suppression, designed to render the wearer invisible. It was the physical manifestation of her demand that I shrink to accommodate Julian's ego. I took the beige dress off the hanger. I walked into the kitchen and dropped it into the trash can. I returned to the bedroom and looked at the tailored navy wool suit waiting on the back of the door. The lines were sharp. The structured shoulders projected authority. The deep blue fabric absorbed the light rather than fading into the background. It was not a dress code. It was armor. I put on the suit. I fastened the single button on the blazer. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, practical knot. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back was not a background character. She was not a prop to be utilized in a deceptive marketing pitch. She was the chief technology officer of Sentinel Protocol. I checked my watch. It was time to attend the rehearsal dinner. It was time to watch Julian pour champagne and deliver a toast to his own brilliance. It was time to sit in the shadows near the kitchen doors and wait for Marcus Sterling to finish reading the forensic dossier. The digital trap had snapped shut, and now I was going to watch the predator realize he was actually the prey. The waterfront country club in Madison County projected an aura of deep generational wealth. The building featured imposing white columns framing a wide veranda that overlooked the Tennessee River. Luxury sedans and imported sports cars filled the valet circle. The entrance smelled of polished mahogany and the expensive, subtle perfume favored by women who serve on museum advisory boards. I surrendered my car keys to a valet, adjusting the cuffs of my navy suit as I walked through the double doors. The private dining room reserved for the rehearsal dinner was located at the end of a long corridor adorned with landscape paintings. As I approached the entrance, the sound of a live 10-piece string quartet drifted into the hallway. The musicians were playing a flawless classical arrangement designed to cover the ambient noise of clinking crystal and hushed conversations. I stepped into the room. The visual impact was a staggering display of stolen capital. Every detail in the space had been meticulously curated to project overwhelming financial success. Towering centerpieces composed of imported white orchids dominated the long banquet tables. Waitstaff wearing crisp white gloves circulated through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with premium champagne flutes. The lighting was carefully calibrated to reflect off the crystal chandeliers, creating an atmosphere of golden hour luxury. The visual opulence was striking, but to my trained eye, it was horrific. I knew exactly who had funded the orchids, the string quartet, and the vintage champagne. I saw the empty home equity line of credit statement superimposed over every luxury detail. My parents had effectively traded the security of their retirement years for a single evening of fabricated prestige. They were financing an illusion to secure a billionaire investor for a fraudulent son. A maitre d' approached me holding a leather-bound seating chart. He asked for my name. When I provided it, his eyes darted to the bottom of the list. His professional smile tightened slightly. He gestured toward the far side of the room, guiding me away from the central VIP tables, where Julian and the Sterling family were gathering. My assigned location was table 14. The pebble of the evening was immediately apparent. The table was tucked aggressively behind a massive load-bearing pillar wrapped in dense floral arrangements. The structural column entirely obscured my view of the head table. More insultingly, the chairs were positioned directly adjacent to the kitchen's swinging doors. The heavy wood-paneled doors swung outward every 30 seconds as waitstaff hurried in and out carrying hot plates and empty glasses. The location was loud, hot, and physically isolating. It was not a logistical oversight. In high-end event planning, seating proximity correlates directly with perceived value. Placing a member of the groom's immediate family behind a pillar near the kitchen was an active, calculated gesture of exile. They needed me invisible. They wanted to ensure Marcus Sterling could not accidentally engage me in conversation and discover the hollow technical claims Julian was making. I reached my designated chair. The crisp white napkin rested on the charger plate. A small, elegant piece of heavy cardstock sat above the forks. The calligraphy was swirling and precise, inked in metallic gold. I picked up the place card. The name written on the heavy paper was not Abigail. It read Pansy. The misspelling was not a careless clerical error by a distracted wedding planner. Calligraphers operate from a strictly vetted, typed master list provided by the hosts. Julian or my mother had actively typed that specific word next to my seating assignment. I held the thick cardstock between my fingers, analyzing the choice of insult. A pansy is a delicate, fragile flower. It thrives only in mild conditions and is easily bruised by harsh weather. It stays low to the ground, blooming in the shade, beneath taller, more dominant plants. It was the perfect botanical symbol for how my family preferred to view me. They needed to believe I was weak, easily intimidated, and content to exist entirely in Julian's shadow. Labeling me a pansy was their way of reasserting control, of demanding that I accept my role as the designated failure. I did not rip the card in half. I did not search the room for my mother to demand an immediate correction. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored navy blazer, adjusting the fabric over my shoulders. I sat down in the chair positioned nearest the kitchen traffic. I placed the golden calligraphed pansy card gently next to my crystal water glass, ensuring the name remained perfectly visible. The heavy wooden kitchen door swung open forcefully. A waiter carrying a large tray of steaming appetizers rushed past. The edge of his tray clipped the back of my chair, jolting me slightly forward. He offered a hasty, muffled apology over his shoulder and kept moving. I adjusted my posture, realigning my chair with the table. I did not feel the sting of rejection. I did not feel the familiar childhood ache of being marginalized by the people who were supposed to protect me. Those emotional responses belonged to a younger version of myself, a version who still believed her family possessed the capacity for baseline decency. Sitting there amidst the noise of the service staff and the smell of industrial kitchen grease, I felt only the cold, analytical patience of a structural engineer. I was functioning like an inspector, observing a poorly constructed suspension bridge mere moments before a fully loaded freight train arrives at the crossing. The blueprints are wrong, the rivets are rusted, and the concrete is crumbling. The inspector does not shout at the bridge or weep over the flawed steel. She simply stands at a safe distance, clipboard in hand, and waits for physics to assert its dominance over poor planning. Let them call me Pansy. Let them hide me behind a floral pillar by the kitchen doors. Let them spend their drained retirement funds on vintage champagne and string quartets. The seating arrangements and the petty insults were irrelevant distractions. They were rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. The digital reality had already shifted. The forensic data dossier verifying the absolute fraud of Apex influence was no longer a theoretical threat. It was a tangible, encrypted file sitting in the executive inbox of the man Julian was currently trying to charm. The data was already moving through the network, defining the new parameters of reality. Gravity does not care where you sit at the reception. It does not care about your bespoke tuxedo or your carefully curated social media presence. When a structure lacks foundational integrity, collapse is not a possibility. It is a mathematical certainty. I took a slow sip of the ice water from my crystal glass. I watched the VIP table through a narrow gap between the floral arrangements on the pillar. Julian was standing near Marcus Sterling, laughing enthusiastically at a joke the venture capitalist had not actually made. My mother was hovering near Sienna, offering compliments on her jewelry, specifically the 3-carat diamond ring financed by a second mortgage. They were dancing on top of a digital landmine. The fuse had been lit 2 hours ago in a cheap hotel business center. I settled into my isolated chair, resting my hands on the white linen tablecloth. I was perfectly content to stay in the shadows. The explosion was coming, and I had the best seat in the house to watch the fallout. The cocktail hour commenced, officially blending the Sterling and Smith families in the open floor space between the banquet tables and the veranda doors. Waitstaff circulated with trays of seared scallops and miniature beef Wellingtons. The string quartet shifted from classical adagios to upbeat contemporary covers. The volume of the room rose, forcing guests to speak louder to be heard over the manufactured cheer. I remained seated at table 14. The heavy kitchen door swung open against the back of my chair with rhythmic predictability. I did not attempt to mingle. I observed the social dynamics from my designated exile, maintaining a clear line of sight through the gap in the floral pillar. My mother operated the room like a seasoned political operative working a fundraising circuit. Elena understood that perception often preempts reality in high society. She targeted Sienna's extended family, systematically identifying the aunts, uncles, and cousins who held influence within the Sterling clan. She needed to establish Julian's mythology before Marcus Sterling made his final investment decision. If the entire family believed Julian was a visionary, Marcus would face internal social pressure to fund the wedding narrative. I watched Elena corner Sienna's aunt, a woman draped in expensive silk and heavy emerald jewelry. My mother leaned inward, creating a false sense of intimacy, her voice pitched perfectly, carrying just enough volume to ensure the surrounding guests overheard the conversation. Julian is an absolute titan, Elena declared. The lie slipped past her teeth with terrifying ease. He built Apex influence entirely from the ground up. He possesses a unique instinct for identifying market trends before they even happen. The venture capital world is practically begging to partner with him, but he is so selective about who he allows into his inner circle. The aunt nodded politely, taking a small sip from her champagne flute. She seemed marginally impressed by the aggressive pitch. She glanced around the room, noting the opulent orchids and the vintage wine. The aesthetics supported the lie. Her gaze drifted past the central tables and landed on my isolated corner near the kitchen. I was wearing a sharp-tailored suit, sitting alone next to a swinging wooden door. The visual disconnect prompted an inevitable question. "And your daughter," the aunt inquired, gesturing slightly with her glass. Sienna mentioned Julian has a younger sister. Abigail, correct. Does she work in the corporate sector as well? Elena did not miss a beat. She executed a heavy, tragic sigh. The sound was engineered to convey deep maternal burden, tempered by loving endurance. It was a performance worthy of a theatrical award. "Oh, Abigail." Elena lowered her voice, adopting a tone of sorrowful confidentiality. "She is finding her path. We try our best to support her, but it is difficult. She is currently between low-level IT contracts. She fixes routers, helps local businesses set up their email servers, that sort of thing. She simply lacks Julian's drive. We have accepted that she prefers a smaller, quieter life." The dramatic irony hovering over the conversation was thick enough to suffocate the room. My mother was standing on a polished hardwood floor, paid for by a maxed-out home equity line of credit that was currently pushing her toward personal bankruptcy. She was actively elevating a son whose entire corporate structure had just been flagged as a catastrophic enterprise fraud. And she was simultaneously pitying a daughter who held the title of Chief Technology Officer at a firm recently valued at $150 million. She was selling a forged painting to an art appraiser while using the original masterpiece as a doorstop. I sat in my chair watching the performance. I did not stand up. I did not cross the room to interrupt the conversation and loudly defend my professional credentials. I did not produce the unexecuted equity transfer contract from my blazer pocket to prove my worth. I knew the fundamental rules of engaging with a narcissist. If you argue with a gaslighter in public, you inevitably look unstable. You become the loud, defensive individual trying to correct a calm, polished liar. The audience invariably sides with the person maintaining composure, regardless of the facts. However, if you remain silent and wait for the objective truth to manifest through external, verified channels, you look like a prophet. I took a slow sip of the sparkling water from my crystal glass. I let Elena weave her fiction. I let her lay down the verbal bricks of Julian's imaginary empire. Every lie she told Sienna's aunt was another structural weakness added to the building. When the collapse occurred, the height of the deception would determine the severity of the impact. The cocktail hour stretched toward its conclusion. The waitstaff began clearing the appetizer plates, preparing the tables for the primary dinner service. The ambient noise in the private dining room reached a steady, chaotic hum. Guests were laughing, finding their seats, checking their phones. At exactly 7:30 in the evening, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The change was not immediate or loud. It was a subtle, localized drop in pressure, akin to the air cooling right before a severe thunderstorm breaks. The shift originated at the far end of the room, near the entrance to the veranda. Marcus Sterling was standing near a tall window, separating himself slightly from a conversation with Julian and David. He pulled his smartphone from the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket. Marcus was a man who rarely checked his device during social functions. He believed in giving his undivided attention to the room, analyzing the people rather than the screen. Pulling his phone out now indicated he was expecting a specific, highly sensitive communication. I watched through the gap in the floral arrangement. Marcus unlocked his screen. The bright white light illuminated the sharp angles of his face. He opened his encrypted messaging application. He accessed the executive inbox linked directly to Sterling Capital. He opened the finalized fraud report generated by Sentinel Protocol. I could not see the text on his screen, but I knew exactly what the forensic dossier contained. It detailed the spoofed latency metrics. It cross-referenced the impossible user logs against the synthetic offshore IP addresses. It exposed the fabricated profit and loss statements. It laid out the absolute, undeniable mathematical proof that Apex Influence was a predatory shell company designed specifically to extract $5 million from his venture capital fund. Marcus did not gasp. He did not drop the phone. He did not shout at Julian. His physical reaction was terrifyingly contained. His posture turned to steel. The relaxed, wealthy father of the bride vanished entirely. The man standing near the window was the ruthless forensic auditor who had dismantled dozens of fraudulent corporations over his 30-year career. He locked his phone and returned it to his pocket. He turned, slowly analyzing the room with predatory focus. His gaze bypassed Julian, who was currently signaling a waiter for more champagne. He ignored David, who was laughing at a joke. He looked past Sienna and Elena. Marcus Sterling began walking. His strides were long and purposeful, cutting a straight line through the mingling crowd. The guest instinctively parted, sensing the dense, unyielding authority radiating from his approach. He did not pause to acknowledge the polite nods directed his way. He was a heat-seeking missile, locked onto a specific target. He walked past the VIP tables in the center of the room. He bypassed the head table decorated with the towering white orchids. He ignored the string quartet playing near the corner. Marcus walked directly toward the shadows. He navigated around the massive floral pillar obstructing the view of the kitchen doors. He stopped directly in front of table 14. He stood looming over my assigned seat, his broad shoulders blocking the ambient light of the crystal chandeliers. He looked down at the tailored navy suit I wore. He looked at my calm, steady posture. Then his eyes dropped to the table, scanning the charger plate, the folded napkin, and the crystal water glass. His gaze locked onto the heavy cardstock resting next to my fork, the card with the metallic gold calligraphy spelling out the word pansy. The heavy wooden door behind me swung open. A waiter carrying a stack of empty trays paused mid-stride, realizing he had almost collided with the billionaire hosting the event. The waiter quickly backed into the kitchen, letting the door swing shut, leaving Marcus and me isolated in the sudden quiet of the corner. Marcus did not offer a greeting. He did not introduce himself. He placed his large hands flat on the white linen tablecloth, leaning forward until his face was level with mine. The trap had closed. The digital reality had finally breached the physical world. The collision was imminent, and the venture capitalist holding the detonator had just found the architect who built the bomb. Marcus Sterling stared at me, his hands braced against the white linen of table 14. He did not speak immediately. He was processing the discrepancy between the forensic data dossier he had just read and the woman sitting in exile next to the kitchen doors. I maintained eye contact, allowing the silence to stretch. I did not offer a nervous smile. I did not attempt to fill the void with polite chatter. I let my posture confirm what he was already beginning to suspect. Before Marcus could articulate his first question, a sudden blur of motion disrupted the periphery of my vision. Julian had noticed Marcus walking across the room. More specifically, Julian had realized Marcus was walking directly toward his exiled sister. My brother's internal panic alarms must have sounded like air raid sirens. He had spent months constructing a flawless narrative, ensuring Marcus viewed him as a peer, as a fellow titan of industry. He had meticulously isolated me, placing me behind a pillar to prevent any accidental technical conversations. The idea that Marcus might speak to the basement IT girl and realize she possessed actual baseline knowledge of server architecture terrified Julian. He assumed I would accidentally expose his incompetence by asking a basic question he could not answer. Julian moved with the frantic urgency of a man trying to catch a falling vase. He abandoned his conversation with my father, leaving his champagne flute on a passing tray. He practically sprinted across the open space designated for the dance floor. He intercepted Marcus just as the venture capitalist opened his mouth to speak. Julian aggressively wedged his body between Marcus and my table. He forced Marcus to turn his back to me, positioning himself as a physical barrier. The movement was jarring, poorly timed, and reeked of desperation. The pebble of the interaction was immediately visible. Despite the aggressive air conditioning in the private dining room, a sheen of frantic sweat had broken out along Julian's hairline. The moisture was beginning to ruin his expensive custom blowout. His breathing was slightly elevated, betraying the sprint across the room. The bolder, however, was the tactical error he committed next. Julian operated on the assumption that the best defense is a good offense. If Marcus was wandering the room bored enough to talk to the IT girl, Julian needed to redirect that attention back to the corporate pitch. He needed to dazzle the billionaire before Marcus could ask any inconvenient questions about family dynamics. He needed to blind him with technical jargon. Marcus Julian began his voice loud enough to cut through the ambient music of the string quartet. "I am so glad I caught you. I was just thinking about the secondary infrastructure scale for Apex. I know we discussed the initial capital injection, but wait until you see our new encryption latency parameters." Julian deployed the buzzwords like smoke grenades, hoping the sheer volume of syllables would confuse the target. He puffed out his chest, trying to project the aura of a visionary founder standing on the brink of a technological breakthrough. The fatal flaw in his strategy was the source material he chose to quote. Julian had never written a line of code in his life. His entire technical vocabulary consisted of phrases he had memorized from trade magazines and stolen competitor analysis reports. To validate his fake software and impress the venture capitalist, he needed high-level architecture jargon. He needed something complex, reliable, and industry-verified. So he started reciting the abstract of a highly technical white paper he had found online. Our multi-node architecture utilizes an advanced AES 256 framework, Julian bragged, emphasizing the acronyms. We have managed to optimize the load balancing to such a degree that our internal server drag is virtually non-existent. We are processing secure data packets with a latency threshold of under 2 milliseconds across our primary network cluster. I sat in my chair hidden behind Julian's broad shoulders, listening to the words spill out of his mouth. He was regurgitating the core architecture of Sentinel Protocol. He had stolen my terminology to impress the man who literally owned the copyright. Julian was standing on a dance floor paid for by our parents' drained retirement account, trying to secure $5 million by pitching my software to my primary investor. He was claiming a 2 millisecond latency threshold on an AES 256 encryption protocol. It was a mathematical impossibility, a fairy tale number designed to sound impressive to someone who did not understand physics. I watched Marcus Sterling's reaction from my vantage point behind Julian. Marcus did not interrupt. He did not immediately expose the plagiarism or call out the absurd metrics. His face transformed into a mask of absolute lethal stoicism. The venture capitalist absorbed the pitch with the cold, analytical focus of a predator evaluating a wounded animal. He let Julian dig the hole deeper, adding layers to the fraud with every syllable. "That is remarkable," Marcus said finally. His tone was perfectly flat, devoid of any genuine enthusiasm. 2 milliseconds on a multi-node encrypted array. You must have a phenomenal technical team to bypass the standard processing drag. "We do," Julian beamed, mistakenly interpreting the flat tone as awe. "We have the best back-end developers in the region. Apex is redefining security standards for marketing data." Marcus nodded slowly. He adjusted his stance, smoothing the lapels of his tuxedo jacket. The gesture was deliberate, giving him physical space to maneuver. Then Marcus smoothly and effortlessly sidestepped Julian's physical blockade. He stepped to the right, forcing Julian to turn and reopening the direct line of sight between the venture capitalist and the woman sitting at table 14. The physical barrier was removed. The confrontation was unavoidable. Marcus locked eyes with me. His gaze was intense, communicating a silent demand for verification. He was holding the digital fraud report in his pocket. He was holding Julian's absurd verbal claims in his mind. Now he wanted to test the final variable in the equation. He wanted to see if the exiled sister understood the joke. Abigail, Marcus said, his voice cutting cleanly through the noise of the room. He used my actual name, not the floral insult printed on the cardstock. "Since you work in the IT sector, maybe you can verify this technical breakthrough for me." Does the apex latency threshold make sense based on current hardware capabilities? The question hung in the air, suspended above the white linen and the crystal glassware. Julian reacted instantly. He let out a loud, condescending laugh, trying to mask his rising panic. He turned to Marcus, waving a dismissive hand in my direction. The gesture was designed to belittle, to shrink my authority before I could even open my mouth. "Marcus, please do not ask her," Julian chuckled, his voice dripping with patronizing arrogance. "She restarts routers for small businesses. She fixes jammed office printers. She does not understand enterprise load paths or encryption algorithms. You might as well ask the valet to evaluate a Formula One engine." Julian stood there grinning, showing his perfectly whitened teeth to the billionaire. He was desperate to maintain the illusion, to keep the spotlight firmly fixed on his fabricated brilliance. He believed he had successfully neutralized the threat by insulting my competence in front of the one man whose opinion mattered. He was completely unaware that he was staring directly down the barrel of a loaded gun. He did not know I possessed the blueprints to the weapon he was trying to fire. He did not know that the man standing next to him had already read the ballistic report, proving the gun fired blanks. I looked at Julian's desperate, sweating face. I looked at the chewed-up plastic pen resting in my blazer pocket. I looked at Marcus Sterling, waiting for the execution order. The string quartet shifted into a rapid staccato movement, accelerating the tempo of the room. The safety was off, and it was time to pull the trigger. The energetic tempo of the string quartet seemed to fade into a vacuum, absorbed by the sudden, dense gravity surrounding table 14. The clinking of crystal and the low hum of cocktail conversation became distant background static. The room contracted, shrinking the world down to 3 people standing on a hardwood floor, paid for by a fraudulent home equity line of credit. Julian maintained his condescending grin, waiting for me to lower my eyes and accept the public humiliation. He expected me to mumble an apology, to stammer over a technical term, and retreat into the shadows where he had assigned me. He relied on the childhood dynamic we had established a decade ago. He assumed the fear of causing a scene would force my compliance. He fundamentally misunderstood the architecture of the situation. You cannot shame a structural engineer by pointing out a flaw in a bridge she did not build. You can only look foolish when she hands you the blueprints, proving you do not know how to read them. I did not break eye contact with Marcus Sterling. I did not raise my voice or allow any emotional tremor to seep into my tone. I spoke with the clinical, absolute precision of a lead architect diagnosing a critical system failure. "The latency threshold he is quoting is mathematically impossible," I said. My voice cut cleanly through the quiet corner of the room. The words were distinct, sharp, and entirely devoid of hesitation. I watched Julian's grin falter. The patronizing amusement vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. He had not expected a coherent sentence, much less a direct, technical contradiction. I continued addressing Marcus directly, ignoring my brother's physical proximity. He claims a 2-millisecond response time on a multi-node array utilizing advanced AES 256 encryption. That metric defies the fundamental physics of data transfer. In order to encrypt, compress, route, and decrypt a packet across multiple secure nodes, the processor requires baseline computational time. I paused, letting the physics settle over the conversation. A 2-millisecond latency only happens if the data is entirely unencrypted, I concluded. It means the security protocols are synthetic. It means the server is spoofing the response to bypass a superficial firewall check. Julian's face drained of blood. The color leached from his cheeks, leaving his skin a sallow, unhealthy gray. The sweat along his hairline seemed to instantly chill. He realized in a fraction of a second that the basement IT girl had just vivisected his multi-million-dollar pitch using 5 sentences of undeniable logic. "Shut up," he hissed. The volume was low, a frantic, venomous whisper intended only for my ears. "You have no idea what you are talking about. You are embarrassing yourself." He stepped closer to my table, his body language turning aggressive. He wanted to physically intimidate me into silence. He wanted to force me back into the corner before Marcus could process the implications of my statement. I did not flinch. I did not shrink back into my chair. I held my ground, anchored by the objective reality of the mathematics. I shifted my gaze from Marcus to Julian. I looked directly into my brother's panicked, desperate eyes and prepared to deliver the ultimate poetic justice. 10 years ago, he had stolen my college database project to pass a seminar. He had presented my hard work as his own genius, and my parents had demanded I remain silent to protect his fragile ego. He had operated his entire adult life on the assumption that other people's labor existed solely to be harvested for his benefit. He believed he could copy and paste his way to the top of the corporate ladder without ever understanding the underlying mechanics of what he was stealing. He thought he was hacking the system again. He thought he could borrow technical authority by reciting a complex abstract he found on the internet. He was about to discover the catastrophic difference between reading a summary and authoring the text. I turned my attention back to the venture capitalist. As stated in the Sentinel Protocol baseline architecture documentation, I said, my voice projecting clearly, true enterprise security requires a minimum 14 millisecond computational drag to ensure the integrity of the encrypted nodes. Any metric significantly lower indicates a compromised or entirely absent defensive perimeter. I did not pause. I did not give Julian time to interject or deflect. I transitioned seamlessly from the technical diagnosis to the source material. I recited the next paragraph of the highly restricted white paper Julian had attempted to plagiarize verbatim. This time, the professor grading his stolen project was a billionaire venture capitalist who specialized in forensic accounting. The plagiarism was not a campus violation. It was a federal crime involving wire fraud, synthetic data manipulation, and a predatory attempt to secure $5 million under false pretenses. Julian stood frozen, his expensive bespoke tuxedo offering zero protection against the exposure of his absolute incompetence. He looked from me to Marcus Sterling. He waited for the venture capitalist to laugh, to dismiss my claims as the bitter ramblings of a jealous sibling. He waited for the billionaire to validate the illusion. Marcus did not laugh. He did not dismiss the claims. He stared at Julian, observing the panic, the sweat, and the sheer terror radiating from the man who had just asked for millions of dollars to fund a mirage. The venture capitalist possessed the final piece of the puzzle, and he was preparing to end the game. Marcus Sterling did not blink. The venture capitalist stood motionless, his dark eyes locked onto my face. The ambient noise of the cocktail hour, the clinking silver, the quiet murmurs, the lively tempo of the string quartet seemed to press against an invisible soundproof barrier surrounding table 14. I watched the cognitive machinery operate behind his eyes. The pieces of the puzzle were rapidly connecting, snapping together with the heavy, undeniable force of verified data. Marcus was a man who spent his life analyzing patterns, evaluating risk, and sniffing out inconsistencies. He was cross-referencing the flawless technical recitation he had just heard against the complex legal documents stored in his firm's secure servers. He processed my absolute command of the proprietary Deep Packet Inspection Protocol. He registered the specific mathematical parameters I had cited regarding the latency threshold. He considered the sheer statistical improbability of a low-level IT contractor quoting the classified core architecture of a defense-grade cybersecurity platform verbatim. The final connection materialized. The initials signed in blue ink at the bottom of the $40 million Series B term sheet aligned with the woman sitting calmly in the tailored navy blazer. A Smith Marcus said softly. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The syllables lacked their usual booming authority. They were quiet, carrying the weight of profound astonishment. The billionaire investor, the man who prided himself on knowing every detail of his portfolio, had just discovered his most valuable technical asset, hiding in plain sight at a rehearsal dinner, exiled behind a floral pillar near the kitchen doors. He realized the brilliant, reclusive architect who engineered the software currently safeguarding his venture capital empire was the exact same woman Julian had publicly introduced as a basement IT girl an hour ago. The shock on his face lasted for exactly 3 seconds. Marcus did not build a financial dynasty by dwelling on surprises. He built it by identifying leverage and executing decisions with ruthless efficiency. The astonishment evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating fury directed entirely at the man standing between us. Marcus turned his broad shoulders slightly, severing his visual connection with me. He pivoted to face Julian. My brother looked like a man standing on the tracks, staring at a locomotive headlights rushing toward him. The desperate, condescending grin was completely gone. Julian's hands twitched at his sides. He opened his mouth, searching for a pivot, a charm offensive, a strategic lie to deflect the impending impact. He had spent his entire adult life talking his way out of consequences, relying on his parents to cover the deficit. He desperately needed a new narrative. Marcus did not give him time to construct one. The venture capitalist shifted his stance, utilizing his physical presence to command the surrounding space. The escalating tension had drawn the attention of several nearby tables. Sienna's extended family members, my parents, and a few groomsmen, had stopped their conversations turning to watch the confrontation unfold. The private bubble expanded, integrating an audience into the conflict. I apologize for the interruption to the evening, Marcus announced. His voice carried the undeniable, booming authority of a man accustomed to silencing boardrooms. He did not shout. He simply projected his words, utilizing a tone that demanded immediate compliance. The remaining ambient chatter in the corner of the room ceased. The string quartet, sensing the shift in the room's dynamic, faltered and dragged their bows to a clumsy halt. But there seems to be a significant misunderstanding regarding who is actually standing in this room, Marcus continued, addressing the gathered crowd. He gestured toward me, utilizing an open palm to direct the collective attention of the guests toward the woman sitting quietly at the exiled table. He did not introduce me as a family member. He did not reference the upcoming wedding or the social connection to his daughter. He utilized my professional title, granting me the exact respect my family had spent 30 years attempting to strip away. "This is Abigail Smith," Marcus declared, his voice echoing slightly off the mahogany-paneled walls. "She is the founder and chief technology officer of Sentinel Protocol. She is the lead architect of the cybersecurity infrastructure that secures the portfolios of Sterling Capital." A collective murmur rippled through the guests. Sienna's aunt, the woman who had listened to my mother pity my career trajectory an hour ago, stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes. My father, David, gripped the back of a nearby chair, his knuckles turning white. Helena stood frozen, her champagne flute trembling in her manicured hand as the carefully constructed mythology of her golden child began to unravel in public. Marcus lowered his hand. He turned his full attention back to Julian. The public announcement was finished. The corporate execution commenced. Julian, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a lethal, gravelly whisper intended for the immediate circle, but sharp enough to slice through the silence. "Your agency is vaporware." Julian flinched, physically recoiling from the word. The label stripped away the expensive penthouse, the European car, and the tailored suit. It reduced his entire existence to a hollow, fraudulent shell. "The due diligence fraud audit my firm initiated on your servers this afternoon was not conducted by a generic automated program," Marcus continued, delivering the final forensic diagnosis. "It was conducted by Sentinel Protocol. The system that caught your team spoofing user metrics and fabricating revenue ledgers was engineered by the exact same sister you just attempted to use as a punchline." The arithmetic of the situation crushed Julian. He realized the magnitude of his error. He had not just failed to secure a $5 million investment. He had committed wire fraud while attempting to steal money from a billionaire using technology built by the sibling he had spent his life marginalizing. The walls of the maze he had constructed had vanished, revealing he was standing in a cage. Julian's knees gave out. The physical toll of the panic, the adrenaline crash, and the public exposure severed his motor control. He collapsed downward. He reached out blindly, searching for a surface to stabilize his descent. His flailing arm extended outward, his elbow swinging wildly. He clipped the edge of a large silver tray held by a passing waiter who had frozen in place to watch the confrontation. The impact dislodged the tray. The waiter scrambled to regain his grip, but gravity intervened. A dozen premium champagne flutes slid across the polished silver surface. They tumbled over the edge and plummeted toward the floor. The crystal hit the polished hardwood. The shattering glass sounded like a sustained, aggressive burst of static interference cutting through the dead silence of the country club. Brilliant, sharp fragments exploded outward, sliding across the polished floorboards and catching the golden light of the chandeliers. Julian landed hard on his hands and knees amidst the wreckage. The champagne splashed across his designer trousers, soaking the expensive fabric. He knelt there, surrounded by the shattered remnants of the luxury he had tried to steal, staring blankly at the floor. His empire, his marriage, and his fabricated reality were entirely annihilated in less than 60 seconds. The digital truth had crashed into the physical world, and the impact left nothing but debris. The silence returned heavier and more oppressive than before. The guests stared at the groom kneeling in a puddle of spilled wine. No one moved to assist him. No one offered a reassuring platitude. The illusion was broken, and the reality was too toxic to touch. Then the sharp, distinct sound of high heels crunching over broken glass broke the silence. The architect of the illusion, the woman who had funded the fraud with a home equity line of credit, realized she was losing control of the narrative, and she stepped forward to initiate a catastrophic pivot. The sharp, distinct sound of high heels crunching over broken crystal severed the heavy silence in the dining room. My mother stepped forward. She moved past the spilled champagne and the scattered remnants of the luxury glassware, ignoring Julian, who remained kneeling on the wet floorboards. Elena had spent her entire adult life managing optics. She operated on the fundamental belief that reality was malleable. If a situation refused to conform to her curated script, she simply rewrote the script out loud and expected everyone else to immediately memorize their new lines. She halted a few feet away from Marcus Sterling. She squared her shoulders and plastered a bright, shaking smile across her face. The expression was terrifying. It was the desperate, rigid grin of a trapped animal attempting to mimic human joy. Well, Elena announced, her voice pitching upward, striving for a tone of pleasant surprise. The single syllable echoed against the mahogany walls. The guests stared at her, unable to comprehend the sheer audacity of the performance. We always knew Abigail possessed a brilliant mind, Elena continued, projecting her voice toward Sienna's extended family. The Smith family breeds innovation, Marcus. We recognized her genius early on. We purposefully pushed her to be independent. We gave her the space she needed to thrive in the corporate sector. We could not be prouder of the empire she has built. It was the most horrific gaslighting pivot I had ever witnessed. 10 minutes ago, she was standing near the appetizers telling an aunt that I was a tragic failure fixing local routers. Now confronted with the undeniable presence of a billionaire investor verifying my executive status, she attempted to claim ownership of my success. She was trying to retroactively draft herself as the supportive architect of a career she had actively tried to suppress. She looked at Marcus, waiting for the venture capitalist to nod, to accept the revised family history, to smile and welcome her into his elite social bracket. Marcus did not smile. He looked at my mother with the cold, sterile disgust of an auditor identifying a forged signature on a tax return. He recognized the manipulation instantly. He offered no verbal response, denying her the validation she desperately sought. The social avenue closed. Elena realized the public relations campaign was dead. Marcus was not going to fund Julian, and he was not going to accept her as a peer. The sudden closure of that social avenue forced her to confront the underlying arithmetic. The venture capital money was gone. The $5 million bailout had evaporated, And waiting for her back in Madison County was a home equity line of credit carrying a maximum capacity balance of $300,000. The rigid smile fell off her face. The polished Alabama socialite vanished entirely. The facade cracked and fell away, leaving behind a terrified, desperate debtor facing the imminent loss of her only sanctuary. Elena pivoted away from Marcus and turned her focus entirely on me. She closed the distance to table 14, stopping just inches from my water glass. Her chest heaved. The maternal warmth she had faked moments ago was replaced by raw, unfiltered panic. "You have to fix this, Abigail," she demanded. Her voice lost its projection, dropping into a shrill, frantic register. "You heard him. You have millions of dollars. Your company is worth a fortune. You have to pay off the bank." I sat in my chair, observing the shift. After a lifetime of diminishing my worth, the exact second she realized I possessed capital, she demanded it as a mandatory tribute. She believed my financial security existed solely to act as a safety net for their catastrophic failures. "We are going to lose the house," Elena continued, her voice cracking under the weight of the impending default. "We leveraged everything for your brother. We bought Sienna's ring with that money. You owe us a bailout." The confession spilled out of her mouth, bypassing any remaining filter of social decorum. In her desperate attempt to guilt me into compliance, she publicly admitted the darkest secret of their financial strategy. She confirmed the timeline I had calculated in the hotel lobby. She announced to the silent room, to the groomsmen, to the Sterling family, that the massive diamond currently resting on the bride's left hand was purchased with stolen retirement funds. The boulder dropped. The ultimate weight of their deception crashed onto the table. I did not raise my voice to match her panic. I did not stand up to physically intimidate her. I operated with the clinical detachment of a structural engineer finalizing a demolition. I reached inside the interior pocket of my tailored navy blazer. My fingers brushed against the crisp, folded edges of the legal document my mother had tried to force upon me that morning. I withdrew the paper and unfolded it, deliberately smoothing the creases. I laid the blank equity transfer contract flat on the white linen tablecloth right next to my place card. I reached into my handbag resting on the floor beside my chair. I retrieved my smartphone. I tapped the screen, waking the device, and opened the photo gallery. I selected the high-resolution capture of the regional bank statement I had photographed in their hotel suite. The screen displayed the $0 available balance and the itemized transaction history, highlighting the $60,000 withdrawal dated October 12th. I placed the phone face up on the table directly beside the corporate contract. Then I reached into my opposite blazer pocket. I pulled out the final component of the interaction, the Chekhov's gun. It was the cheap, chewed-up blue plastic pen my mother had shoved into my hand hours earlier. The plastic casing was dented, covered in Julian's anxious bite marks. It was a worthless, damaged tool, representing the hollow foundation of their entire lifestyle. I held the pen over the table. I pressed my thumb against the top mechanism. The sharp, metallic click of the ballpoint deploying sounded like a heavy deadbolt locking into place. I pressed the tip of the cheap pen against the thick, premium paper of the equity transfer contract. I did not sign my initials. I did not sign the name Pansy. I applied heavy downward pressure and drew a massive, thick 0 across the center of the page, intersecting the liability clauses and the signature line. The blue ink bled into the paper, marking the exact numeric value of my obligation to their crisis. I set the pen down gently on top of the document. I looked up, meeting my mother's terrified, frantic gaze. "I do not owe you a bailout," I said quietly. The words were level, devoid of anger, carrying only the chilling finality of a closed ledger. I am not a variable in your financial modeling. You bet your retirement on a fraud because you liked how the aesthetics looked. Now you get to live inside the math. Elena stared at the giant blue 0. Her mouth opened, but her vocal cords failed to produce a sound. The reality of the boundary I had just established paralyzed her. There was no negotiation remaining. The bank vault was sealed. Movement from the right side of my peripheral vision drew my attention. Sienna Sterling stepped away from the crowd. The bride had remained entirely silent during the escalation. She had watched Julian collapse. She had listened to Marcus deliver the forensic diagnosis. She had heard my mother orchestrate the desperate pivot. Sienna was her father's daughter. She possessed a quiet dignity and an inherent understanding of financial data. Sienna walked slowly toward table 14. The heavy silk of her designer gown rustled softly against the floorboards. She stopped next to my mother and looked down at the items I had arranged on the tablecloth. She ignored the equity transfer contract. Her gaze locked onto the illuminated screen of my smartphone. Sienna analyzed the bank statement. She read the date of the $60,000 wire transfer, October 12th. She cross-referenced that specific date against her own memory, tracing the timeline back to a sunlit terrace overlooking a vineyard in Napa Valley. She remembered Julian getting down on one knee 2 days later. I watched the cognitive realization hit her. The romantic narrative she had cherished dissolved instantly. The grand gesture, the promise of a shared corporate empire, the illusion of marrying a successful peer, evaporated. She realized the man kneeling in the spilled champagne behind her had funded his devotion by draining the survival money of the two elderly people standing across the room. A look of visceral, profound disgust washed over Sienna's face. It was the expression of someone who had just discovered they were wearing something toxic. Sienna raised her right hand and gripped the 3-carat custom-cut diamond resting on her left ring finger. She did not hesitate. She did not look back at Julian to demand an explanation. The data displayed on the screen provided all the context she required. She pulled the heavy ring over her knuckle. Sienna extended her hand over the table. She opened her fingers, allowing gravity to reclaim the stolen asset. The platinum band hit the thick paper of the equity transfer contract. It landed directly inside the massive blue 0 I had drawn using the chewed-up pen. The diamond caught the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead, flashing brilliantly against the cheap ink. The physical thud of the jewelry hitting the table served as the final gavel strike. Sienna turned her back on my family. She walked away from the table, returning to her father's side. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on his daughter's shoulder, his eyes tracking her movement with quiet approval. He looked at me one final time, offering a single brief nod of professional acknowledgement. The merger was officially canceled. The venture capital was withdrawn. The fraudulent engagement was terminated. The digital trap had executed its programming flawlessly, leaving the predators caught in their own snare. I sat in my chair looking at the ring resting inside the 0, prepared to stand up and walk out of the wreckage. I looked across the private dining room, observing the remaining members of my family. The atmosphere had transitioned from a high-stakes corporate standoff to the grim reality of a disaster recovery site. Julian remained on his hands and knees. The expensive fabric of his bespoke tuxedo soaked up the spilled champagne pooling on the hardwood floor. He was not weeping loudly. He was emitting a shallow, breathless sobbing. It was the pathetic respiratory failure of a man whose entire ego had just been punctured and deflated in front of an audience. He stared blindly at the shattered crystal fragments surrounding his palms, unable to process the absolute destruction of his fabricated identity. The marketing genius, the tech visionary, the wealthy groom. All of those titles had evaporated, leaving only a broke, unemployed fraud kneeling in a puddle of cheap wine. Elena broke her paralysis. Her initial shock morphed into a frantic, defensive rage. The concept of accountability was entirely foreign to her psychological makeup. If a plan failed, she instinctively searched for an external target to absorb the blame. She spun away from the table and directed her fury at the ceiling, throwing her hands upward. "This is not fair," Elena screamed. Her voice lost all traces of its curated country club polish. It was a raw, grating sound echoing against the mahogany paneling. "We did everything right. We supported him. We sacrificed our retirement to give him a chance. You all set us up to fail." She was ranting to a room full of silent, horrified guests. She was attempting to rewrite the narrative in real time, casting herself as a tragic martyr, victimized by a cruel universe and an ungrateful daughter. She refused to acknowledge that her sacrifice was actually a predatory gamble. She wanted the audience to believe the math was wrong, rather than admitting her investment strategy was inherently corrupt. My father David stood 3 feet away from her. He did not attempt to calm his wife. He did not step forward to help his son up from the wet floor. He just stood there, his shoulders slumped, staring fixedly at his polished leather shoes. For 3 decades, David had chosen passive complicity over active integrity. He had watched Julian steal my college project and remained silent. He had signed the home equity loan documents, prioritizing his wife's delusions over foundational financial security. His silence had always been a choice, and now he was calculating the ultimate cost of that quiet surrender. I did not yell back at my mother. I did not offer a smug remark to Julian. I did not demand an apology from my father. Gloating implies a competition. It implies that their validation still holds value in my internal hierarchy. You do not gloat when a poorly engineered building collapses. You simply document the structural failure and walk away from the debris. I reached across the white linen tablecloth. I retrieved my smartphone, sliding it safely into my leather handbag. I picked up my clutch and fastened the metallic clasp. The diamond ring Sienna had discarded remained exactly where it landed, resting inside the thick blue zero I had drawn on the fraudulent corporate contract. It was a perfect still-life portrait of a canceled merger. Before turning to leave, my gaze caught a final detail resting on the edge of the table. It was the heavy piece of cardstock bearing the metallic gold calligraphy, the seating assignment they had maliciously designed to keep me contained. The word pansy shone brightly under the crystal chandeliers. I analyzed the physical state of the card. A foot away, a dozen premium champagne flutes lay in jagged pieces. A puddle of liquid was slowly creeping toward the base of the floral pillar. The entire corner of the room was a chaotic mess of shattered glass and spilled alcohol. Yet the small paper card remained perfectly intact. It was entirely untouched by the destruction surrounding it. Not a single drop of wine had stained the edges. Not a single shard of crystal had scratched the ink. They had labeled me a fragile flower, attempting to project their own inherent weaknesses onto my character. They needed me to be the brittle component of the family to mask the fact that their entire lives were constructed out of thin glass. I looked at the pristine card and felt a profound, quiet clarity. I was not the fragile one. I was the load-bearing pillar they had attempted to build their house of cards around. When I refused to carry their debt, the structure simply yielded to gravity. I turned away from table 14. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored navy blazer and began walking toward the exit. The crowd of guests instinctively parted, creating a clear, unobstructed path to the doors. No one offered a comment. No one attempted to block my departure. Sienna extended family members simply stepped aside, watching me pass with expressions blending shock and distinct professional respect. I walked past the string quartet, who were silently packing their instruments into velvet-lined cases. I reached the heavy double mahogany doors marking the entrance to the private dining room. I pushed the brass handles outward. The thick wood swung open, yielding to my momentum. I stepped into the carpeted hallway and let the doors glide shut behind me. The heavy wood sealed the frame, cutting off the auditory chaos. Elena's shrill voice, Julian's pathetic sobbing, the murmured whispers of the bewildered guests, all of it was instantly muted. The silence of the corridor felt rich and clean. I walked out to the valet circle. The cool night air of Alabama brushed against my face, carrying the scent of the nearby river. I handed my ticket to the attendant, tipped him generously, and slid into the driver's seat of my car. I merged onto the highway heading back to Huntsville, leaving the wreckage of their mythology in the rearview mirror. The fallout was rapid, unsparing, and thoroughly documented. 6 weeks later, I sat in my home office reviewing the digital updates from the Madison County Courthouse. I did not need to call my relatives to uncover the conclusion of their story. I am an engineer. I rely on verified data, and public records do not lie. Apex Influence ceased operations within 10 days of the rehearsal dinner. Without the sterling capital infusion, Julian could not meet his basic payroll obligations or satisfy his commercial lease agreement. The facade crumbled overnight. The landlord locked the penthouse doors. The dealership repossessed the European sports car. Julian filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy liquidation, surrendering his non-existent assets to a line of angry creditors. The financial shockwave traveled directly up the family tree. The regional bank, holding the second mortgage on my parents' property, initiated the default protocol. The $300,000 balance was due, and the funds were permanently gone. To avoid a public foreclosure auction, my parents were forced to list their 4-bedroom sanctuary for a rapid-fire sale. They sold the property they had spent 30 years maintaining, settling the debt with the remaining equity. The sale stripped them of their wealth and their status. Public change of address records indicated they had relocated. They moved out of the affluent Huntsville suburbs, downgrading to a cramped rental apartment in Decatur. They were starting over on a fixed pension, carrying the social weight of a canceled, high-profile wedding and a bankrupt son. They never called me. I never reached out. The silence between us was no longer a weapon they used to isolate me. It was a boundary I maintained to protect my peace. I locked my computer screen and stood up from my desk. I left my house and drove to the Cummings Research Park. I scanned my security badge at the entrance of the Sentinel Protocol headquarters. I walked through the humming server rooms, passing rows of encrypted data nodes, managing the security of 100 different defense contractors. I greeted my development team and walked into my personal workspace. My corner office features floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Southern Tech Corridor. The space is quiet, structured, and built on a foundation of verifiable mathematics. I sit at my desk building software architecture that actively protects the truth. I engineer systems designed to catch anomalies, to expose synthetic data, and to ensure that hollow facades cannot withstand structural stress testing. The failure that occurred in that country club was never mine. I did not cause the collapse. I merely provided the diagnostic report proving the foundation was already rotten. The catastrophic ruin belonged entirely to a family that valued loud illusions over quiet competence. They spent a decade demanding that I shrink to accommodate their lies, and they ultimately suffocated under the weight of their own deception. If you are the individual sitting at the exiled table, hidden behind a pillar and told to blend in, hear this clearly. You do not need to alter your dimensions to fit into their distorted reality. You do not need to argue with gaslighters or shout to prove your worth. You do not need to throw a single stone to bring down a house of cards. Just hold your ground, protect your foundation, document the objective reality, and let the math do the rest. When we examine the wreckage of a collapsed family dynamic, it is tempting to focus entirely on the physical debris. We look at the shattered champagne flutes on a country club floor, the canceled vendor contracts, and the foreclosure notices. We look at the vanished venture capital and the empty bank accounts. But financial ruin is rarely the actual disease. In almost every case, a bankrupt family is merely the final, inevitable symptom of a moral decay that began decades earlier, quietly, around a kitchen table. The story of Abigail, Julianne, and their parents serves as a profound mirror held up to the complexities of the modern American family. It strips away the polished veneer of suburban success and forces us to confront the foundational principles of parenting. How do we measure the success of our children? And more importantly, what are we willing to sacrifice to maintain the illusion of a perfect family? In traditional family structures, parents are the architects of their children's reality. They lay the bricks of fairness, honesty, and emotional awareness. But David and Elena did not build a home. They built a stage set. They succumbed to one of the most toxic traps in American culture: the belief that a family's worth is determined by outward projection rather than internal integrity. They wanted the aesthetic of the American dream, the wealthy son, the elite social circle, the venture capitalist connections, without requiring the discipline, competence, and honesty necessary to actually achieve it. Their primary failure was a catastrophic lack of emotional awareness in their parenting. When they looked at Julian, they did not see a young man who needed guidance, boundaries, and the occasional harsh sting of failure to develop resilience. They saw an extension of their own egos. By constantly shielding Julian from the consequences of his actions, beginning with a stolen college coding project, they did not protect him. They engineered his ultimate destruction. They taught him that rules were flexible, that competence could be faked, and that charm could endlessly substitute for character. They confused enabling with loving. True family responsibility dictates that we hold our loved ones accountable. It requires parents to possess the emotional fortitude to look at their child and say, "You are wrong, and you must make amends." By failing to do this, David and Elena created a predator who believed he was entitled to harvest the labor, the credit, and eventually the retirement savings of those around him. The flip side of the golden child dynamic is the creation of the scapegoat, or the glass child. Abigail's journey illuminates the deep, silent damage inflicted when a family demands that one child shrink so another can look tall. Parenting requires a delicate, equitable distribution of light. When parents systematically dim the lights on a competent, quiet child to hide the flaws of an arrogant one, they are committing emotional sabotage. They are teaching that child that her worth is conditional, that her brilliance is an inconvenience, and that her natural personality is something that needs to be covered up by a shapeless beige dress. Abigail's response, however, is a masterclass in establishing boundaries. She teaches us that family loyalty should never be synonymous with participating in a shared delusion. In many traditional households, there is immense pressure to protect the family name at all costs. The phrase, "we are family," is too often weaponized to demand silence in the face of injustice. Elena tried to use that exact weapon, demanding a financial bailout in the name of familial duty. But Abigail understood a vital, liberating truth. You cannot heal a toxic dynamic by funding it. Drawing a thick blue 0 on a fraudulent contract was not an act of malice. It was an act of profound, necessary boundary setting. It was the moment that truth finally outvoted the guilt. Raising children in today's highly competitive culture requires parents to prioritize deep emotional intelligence over superficial achievements. It requires celebrating the quiet, structural builders just as much as the loud, charismatic speakers. If David and Elena had valued Abigail's genuine architectural mind instead of Julian's hollow marketing pitch, they would currently be enjoying a peaceful retirement. Instead, they are sitting in a cramped rental apartment, suffocating under the weight of the lies they chose to finance. The universe, much like a forensic data algorithm, eventually audits us all. It checks our ledgers, tests our load-bearing walls, and exposes every fabricated metric. If this story resonates with a silent ache in your chest, if you have ever been the one relegated to the shadows, handed the cheap pen, or told to blend in so someone else could shine, know that your quiet competence is your greatest armor. You are not the fragile one. We share these narratives because the truth thrives in the light. If you found a piece of your own history hidden within Abigail's quiet vindication, I invite you to join our community. Follow the Revenge Order channel and subscribe. Here, we believe in the power of undeniable facts, the strength of silent builders, and the deeply satisfying moment when the math finally does the talking. Drop a comment and share your own experiences of setting boundaries. Your story might be the exact blueprint someone else needs to start rebuilding their life. As you step away from this story and back into the rhythm of your own life, take a moment to evaluate the architecture of your own relationships. Look closely at your dining room table. Who is being encouraged to speak, and who is being subtly asked to disappear? Are the foundations of your family built on the solid bedrock of honesty and mutual respect? Or are they resting on a fragile network of managed optics and borrowed time? We all build our lives choice by choice, word by word, truth by truth. When the inevitable storms come and the heavy doors swing shut, the only thing that will keep your roof from caving in is the integrity of the materials you chose to use. The math always balances in the end. The only question is whether you will be standing on solid ground when it does, or sweeping up the broken glass.